I told my son his father had just died, and he answered with 7 words that shattered what was left of me. "It's Megan's birthday. Can we talk tomorrow?" That was the moment I knew I hadn't just lost my husband. I had lost my son too. No pause, no gasp, no, "I'm on my way." Just casual dismissal, like I had called to ask about the weather. And it hit me harder than the death itself, not because of what he said, but because of what it revealed. The distance, the coldness, the quiet truth that grief doesn't always begin with a death. It begins the moment you realize the people you raised no longer recognize the weight of your pain. Just hours earlier, Gerald had been alive, smiling, joking, stirring his coffee at the kitchen table like he did every morning for 42 years. He was halfway through a joke about my grocery mistake. I'd bought the wrong creamer again. He tapped his spoon on the rim of his mug and chuckled, saying, "If I drop dead from this powdered nonsense, you'll finally know real guilt." I rolled my eyes, laughed, because that was us. That was our rhythm. Then his hand twitched. The spoon slipped. His smile faltered, and in a split second, his face turned pale and hollow, like something inside him had vanished. I thought it was a joke Gerald loved to tease. But then he collapsed. I dropped the butter knife. My knees hit the tile. I screamed his name, and still he didn't move. The spoon was on the floor. His coffee had gone cold. And so had he. By the time the paramedics arrived, I already knew. Not from their words, but from his silence. His finger still warm from the mug minutes before had turned cold against my cheek. I did the chest compressions. I said his name over and over, while the 911 operator guided me with a calmness I hated. She didn't know Gerald. She didn't know how many mornings we spent at that very table, solving crossword puzzles, planning trips we'd never take. When they pronounced him, I nodded like I was in a dream. Like maybe this wasn't real, like maybe I'd wake up in a few minutes and he'd be back in his chair, teasing me about the creamer again. But reality isn't kind to the hopeful. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at nothing. And when I finally picked up the phone, I didn't even think. I just did what any mother, any widow would do. I called our son, Nathan. 5 rings. Then his voice, distracted, flat. "Oh, Mom, today's Megan's birthday. Can I call you later?" I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just let the silence answer for me. Then I hung up before he could hurt me any further. The room around me felt like it was shrinking. I looked back at Gerald's chair, still slightly turned, still warm from his body. I sat beside him, gripping his lifeless hand like maybe, just maybe if I loved hard enough, I could undo what had just happened. I didn't know how long I stayed there. Time stopped. The coroner came. Asked if I wanted a moment. But the moment I needed had already passed. What could I say to a body that used to be my best friend? What words could undo the way my world had been carved open and emptied? I went upstairs without changing the sheets. Our bed still held the imprint of his body from the night before. On his nightstand was his phone. I picked it up, not expecting anything, but hoping. And there it was. A missed call. 10:42 p.m. The night before he died, Gerald had called Nathan. No answer. No voicemail. Just silence. And I couldn't help but wonder, did he know something? Did he feel something? Had he tried to reach out one last time, and our son ignored it? That night, I held Gerald's phone to my chest like a relic, like it contained the last heartbeat of the man I loved. My whole life narrowed into that moment, into the soft glow of the phone screen, into the aching absence of a son who once built Lego castles with his father, and now couldn't be bothered to show up when he was lowered into the ground. And the saddest part, not the death, not the grief, but the clarity, The sharp, cutting clarity that sometimes the people you love most grow into strangers. That sometimes absence doesn't begin when someone dies. It begins when they choose not to show up at all. The day of Gerald's funeral felt like stepping into a parallel universe, one where the world kept moving, people kept breathing, and conversations echoed all around me, yet none of it felt real. I stood by his casket, gripping the edges of the podium, not for strength but for balance, trying to keep myself from collapsing under the weight of grief. People I hadn't seen in years came to whisper condolences. He was such a good man. We're so sorry for your loss. But all I could hear was the silence, the absence, the gaping hole where my son should have been. Nathan wasn't there. Not in the pews, not at the entrance, not even in the damn parking lot. And the silence of that choice, that deliberate absence, screamed louder than anything the choir could sing or the pastor could say. It didn't just hurt, it humiliated, it isolated. It drew a red circle around me in a room full of black suits and solemn faces, and made it painfully clear I was alone in this. Even Gerald, gone though he was, had shown up. But our only child had chosen not to. I remember the night before I had made the call just to confirm. Just to ask, "You'll be there, right?" But Megan answered instead. Her voice was cheerful, almost oblivious. "Nathan's still thinking about it," she said. "We already booked a weekend getaway for my birthday, and the cancellation fees are steep this close to the date." She rambled about self-care, how birthdays matter too, how it's important to keep things light in hard times for her mental health. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply hung up, because if you have to beg your child to attend his own father's funeral, you've already lost something deeper than time. You've lost connection. You've lost respect. The next morning, I stood there surrounded by well-wishers who didn't know half the story, and I kept waiting foolishly for the sound of a car door, for Nathan to come running in late but present. But nothing came. Just more faces, more small talk, and that damn question on repeat. Where's Nathan? Did he miss his flight? Is Megan okay? Even Gerald's old college friend Frank leaned over with a puzzled frown and said, "I thought your boy would be front and center today." And I nodded, as if that thought hadn't been cutting into me like glass since the moment I woke up. But the moment that truly shattered me didn't happen during the service. It came afterward, over lukewarm coffee in a church fellowship hall, next to a half-empty tray of cookies no one wanted to eat. One of Gerald's former co-workers, Brian, approached me. He was kind, respectful, but hesitant. "I don't mean to pry," he said, "but Gerald mentioned something odd last month." He was helping Nathan out financially. He seemed stressed about it. I froze. Gerald never told me anything like that. We shared everything, or so I thought. We had no secrets, no separate accounts, no hidden debts, or at least that's what I believed. I thanked Brian politely, excused myself to the restroom, and sat on the toilet lid like a statue, hands in my lap, eyes fixed on the tile floor, my mind spinning. Why hadn't Gerald told me? Why would Nathan need financial help? Why did this feel so familiar, like a warning I had missed? That night, when I returned home, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a mausoleum, a place where memories echoed, and grief seeped through the walls like cold air. I poured myself a glass of wine, stared at Gerald's empty armchair, and tried not to think. But then I opened Instagram, a foolish habit, and there she was. Megan, smiling, wearing a bright pink dress, holding a mimosa in a gold-rimmed glass. The caption read, "Best birthday ever. Love my hubby." Posted during the funeral, during the eulogy, and I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling, my heart pounding, not just from rage, but from the deep ache of being replaced. Of watching someone who should have been grieving use the moment to celebrate, to broadcast joy while I stood alone, burying the man who'd built our life brick by brick. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in our bed, still unmade since Gerald last lay in it. At around 3:00 a.m., I got up, opened Gerald's desk, and started digging through the papers he always kept so meticulously organized. Not out of paranoia, but out of something colder, something sharper. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was searching. I was investigating, because Nathan didn't just skip a funeral. He skipped his father's goodbye. And suddenly, Brian's comment about financial stress didn't feel like a side note. It felt like the missing piece. By morning, I had a mission, a quiet one. I wasn't looking for closure. I was looking for truth, because the truth had gone silent for too long, and I was ready to follow it wherever it led. I woke up that morning, not with grief, but with something colder, something heavier. It wasn't mourning anymore. It was suspicion, a sharp, silent instinct that whispered, "There's more to this story." I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed still wrapped in the scent of the man who built this house, who filled every drawer with order, every file with quiet intention. Gerald had always been meticulous, private in a dignified way, but never secretive. Or at least I believed that. But now I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. The image of Megan's birthday post, the pink dress, the mimosa, the caption still burned behind my eyes, and Brian's words from the funeral echoed with eerie clarity. He mentioned helping Nathan out, seemed stressed. That didn't sound like Gerald. He never acted stressed, never showed cracks. So what had he been carrying alone in silence while I slept beside him? Every night I walked to the closet and opened the mirrored door. Behind our wedding photo framed and yellowed at the edges, I reached for the tiny piece of masking tape I'd always thought was just a sentimental touch. A spare key taped behind the life we'd built together. And suddenly, it felt like something else. Not just trust, maybe a test, or a last chance. I opened Gerald's filing cabinet, the one he'd always said was just boring paperwork. But inside it wasn't boring. It was devastating. Folder after folder, labeled by month, by year, in his neat handwriting. Tax returns, insurance statements. And then tucked between home repairs and medical records, I found it. A slim blue folder labeled Nathan Transfers. My breath caught before I even opened it. My hands shook as I slid it out, the paper warm from my grip. Inside was a quiet history I had never been told. A timeline of betrayal so cleanly documented, it could have been a business report. Wire transfers from Gerald's account to Nathan's. Regular, large, spanning the last 18 months. $2,000. $3, $500. $4, $200. And then one entry that made my stomach drop like a stone, $12,000. Urgent Megan Medical. I stared at the numbers like they were foreign. Like they belonged to someone else's life. Not mine. Not Gerald's. Not the man who'd taught Nathan how to ride a bike, how to build credit, how to become the kind of man he could be proud of. And yet, there it was. A record of generosity turned secret. A lifeline quietly extended behind my back. And it wasn't the money that hurt the most. It was the silence. The fact that I didn't know. That I hadn't been told. 15 transfers, 18 months, and not a word. We'd always promised no secrets. We made that vow not at the altar, but on a much smaller day over dinner in our first apartment, sitting on mismatched chairs with our bank statements spread across the table. We'd agreed full honesty always. And yet, here I was, alone, reading a ledger that made a liar of memory. And then, folded between the last two statements, I found the letter. Yellow legal pad paper. Gerald's handwriting, steady, neat, unmistakable. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Nathan. This is the second time you've told your mother one thing and done another. I've kept quiet because I wanted to believe you were being honest, but if you lie about Megan's expenses again, or if I find out you've used this money for anything other than what you said, I'll have no choice but to cut you off completely. I love you, but I won't let you take advantage of your mother's trust. No signature. Just a date, 2 weeks before he died. He never sent it. Maybe he didn't get the chance. Maybe he hesitated. Maybe he hoped Nathan would change without the warning. But he didn't. And now Gerald was gone, and the only evidence left was this paper trembling in my hand. I sat back on the floor, the letter pressed to my chest like a wound, and let the weight of it all settle. Gerald had been fighting a quiet war I didn't even know was happening. He was shielding me, protecting me from the truth about our son, a truth I wasn't ready to face. But now, I didn't have a choice. The memory of Nathan's voice on the phone came rushing back flat, indifferent. It's Megan's birthday. Can we talk tomorrow? And I saw it now, not just as coldness, but as calculation. He had known, he had chosen, and he had been lying for longer than I could admit to myself. That evening, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply put the folder back into the drawer, locked it, and taped the key back behind our wedding photo just as he'd left it. Not out of ritual, but because I needed time to think. Not just about the money or the lies, but about what kind of man my son had become, and whether I had the strength to finish what Gerald had started. I walked back into the kitchen, the place where Gerald had died just days earlier. His mug was still in the sink, the same one he'd held while joking about the creamer, the last moment of laughter before everything changed. I stood there staring at the faucet, at the untouched mug, and whispered the same question over and over in my mind. How long had I been pretending not to see? He showed up 5 days after the funeral. No warning, no apology, just appeared on my doorstep on a Wednesday afternoon, as if grief had an expiration date, as if lateness could be rewritten as effort. I opened the door to find him standing there, my son's hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, his eyes restless, his expression stiff and unreadable. Behind him, Megan sat idling in the driver's seat, sunglasses on engine running like she was prepared to drive off at the first sign of discomfort. And in that moment, I understood everything before a single word was spoken. He wasn't here for me. He wasn't here for Gerald. He was here for damage control. I stepped aside without speaking, letting him in, not out of warmth, but ritual. My body moved from memory, not emotion. He walked in and sat on the edge of the couch like it might bite him. Gerald's armchair sat untouched across the room, still holding the quiet weight of everything Nathan had ignored. I offered him coffee out of habit. He declined. He started talking before I could breathe, like a man racing against a clock no one else could hear. Megan thinks I should have come sooner, he said. She's probably right. I wanted to laugh. Of course Megan thought that. Of course it had taken her permission. Not grief, not guilt, just optics. She was the PR team, and this was the crisis. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch between us, letting him squirm, because I wasn't the one on trial anymore. He was. What he didn't know was that my phone had already been recording the moment he walked through the door. Tucked quietly into the pocket of my cardigan, it captured every stammer, every shift, every crack in his voice. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I no longer trusted myself to remember the truth clearly when the gaslighting came later. Did you know your father tried to call you the night before he died? I asked. My voice was calm, too calm. His jaw twitched. Just a flicker, a tiny betrayal of guilt. I had my phone on silent, he said quickly. We were at dinner. Megan planned this surprise thing. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing how hollow it sounded, but I didn't interrupt. I let the silence return thick and stifling until he began to fill it with excuses. I meant to call him back. I did, but he didn't say anything was wrong, and neither did you. That one stung. He tried to shift it onto me as if Gerald's death was a shared oversight, as if mourning had a checklist and we'd both failed to complete it. I didn't flinch. He wasn't sick, Nathan. He died at the breakfast table, 5 minutes after making a joke about powdered creamer. Nathan looked away, rubbed his forehead like I was burdening him with inconvenient facts, and then I said it. I found the transfers. His entire body tensed like I had cracked the air open. What transfers? He blurted, too fast, too loud. The ones from Dad's account to yours. Megan's medical bills. Your rent shortfall. Your vacations. Don't lie to me, Nathan. Not now. And he had the audacity to look offended. Those were loans, Mom. We were going through a rough patch, Dad offered. I didn't argue. I simply handed him the yellow letter, Gerald's unsent warning. The one that made it clear this wasn't a loan. It was a reluctant act of love laced with suspicion. Nathan read it, folded it up, like it was nothing more than a grocery list, and said softly, "He didn't mean that." That's when I knew. I wasn't talking to my son anymore. Not the boy who used to fall asleep on Gerald's chest watching football. Not the teenager who helped build that backyard shed. I was looking at a man who had learned how to justify betrayal, who had chosen comfort over character again and again. And I felt nothing. No fury, no heartbreak. Just cold, unblinking clarity. This wasn't someone who made a mistake. This was someone who made a pattern. A pattern of lying. A pattern of using. A pattern of disappearing when it mattered most and reappearing only when the inheritance looked fragile. I stood up, walked to the front door. "I'll let you know if I need anything," I said. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe something soft, something strategic. But before the words could leave his mouth, Megan honked from the car. He nodded and left. No hug, no apology, no final glance. And as I closed the door behind him, I realized what Gerald hadn't been able to do in life, I would do now. Not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for clarity. The morning after Nathan left, I didn't make coffee. I didn't open the blinds. I didn't cry. I just stood in the middle of the kitchen where Gerald had once smiled through sleepy eyes, where the sound of his spoon tapping against a mug used to echo like comfort, and I made a decision. A quiet one. A cold one. A necessary one. I picked up the phone and called Alan Clean, our family's attorney of nearly 30 years. He'd handled Gerald's business filings, our wills, our property transfers. He once sent us a card when our dog died. When I said I need to revise my estate immediately, Alan didn't ask questions. He just cleared his schedule. For the first time since Gerald's death, I moved with purpose. I gathered everything: bank statements, the folder labeled Nathan Transfers, Gerald's handwritten but unsent letter, and the audio file from Nathan's visit the day before. I even added one final item, a letter addressed to Ava to be opened on her 18th birthday. Because no matter what Megan would spin, no matter what Nathan would try to bury my granddaughter, deserved the truth, the whole truth. The next day, I walked into Alan's office with that manila folder tucked beneath my arm like a shield. He looked at me and said softly, "This is about more than estate planning, isn't it?" I nodded, and then I placed the folder on the table between us and said, "Everything goes into a trust. Every account, every asset. The house, the annuity Gerald stocks, but not for Nathan, not for Megan, not a single cent." Alan didn't flinch. He just opened a legal pad and began to write. We structured the trust carefully so that Ava would inherit everything, but not until she turned 25. No early withdrawals for shopping sprees or pressure-filled bribes, just education and housing. No luxury cars. No guilt-funded vacations. I asked Alan to add a clause that if Nathan or Megan ever challenged the will, Ava would gain full control immediately, and they'd lose not just access to the trust, but visitation rights during the trust's active years. Some would say it was harsh, but harshness is relative when you've watched your husband die with a spoon still in his hand. and your only child choose brunch over burial. Alan reviewed everything twice. Then we added Ava's letter, sealed in an envelope marked to be opened on her 18th birthday. Inside, I wrote not bitterness, but truth. I told her who her grandfather really was, what he sacrificed, what he endured, and what her parents tried to hide under politeness and manipulation. I told her that the money she would inherit wasn't a reward, it was a responsibility. A reminder to choose love over convenience, loyalty over appearances, and courage over compliance. Because she was the only one in our family who still had a chance to get it right. When the final draft was notarized and filed, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd built a wall one Gerald never had the heart to raise. Not out of spite, but protection. Not revenge, but legacy. Because if my son saw us as an ATM without an expiration date, he was about to discover just how long that machine had been watching, documenting, and preparing to cut the cord. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. Gerald's chair across from me. The house quiet. I reread the letter I'd written to Ava, 6 handwritten pages of history, heartbreak, and hope. And as I sealed it with shaking hands, I felt something shift. Not closure. Not peace, but control. For the first time since the funeral, I felt the ground beneath me again. Steady, solid, mine. And that was the moment I realized this isn't just about inheritance. It's about identity. About who we become when those we love fail us. About who we protect when silence is no longer an option. And most of all, about the stories we leave behind, not for the ones who betrayed us, but for the ones still becoming who they are. I didn't rewrite my will to punish my son. I rewrote it to protect my granddaughter. Because legacy isn't what we leave to people. It's what we leave in them. It was 3 weeks after the confrontation when I found it. A plain white envelope tucked neatly into my mailbox with no return address. My name was written across the front in careful, almost hesitant handwriting. Rounded letters I instantly recognized. Ava, my 12-year-old granddaughter. My heart dropped into my stomach. This wasn't a drawing. This wasn't a thank you note. I could feel it, whatever this was. It wasn't innocent. Inside was a small black flash drive. No note, no explanation, just silence and trust. I sat down in Gerald's old chair, my fortress now, and plugged it into my laptop. Folders appeared instantly, each labeled by date. I clicked on the first one, unsure whether I was about to unearth pain or confirmation. It was both. The first file was a voice recording, shaky, muffled, clearly captured from behind a door. Megan's voice cut through the static, fast and sharp. She's manipulating everyone with that will. If Ava sides with her, I swear to God, Nathan, will pull her out of that school and homeschool her until she gets her head on straight. My breath caught. Then came Nathan's quieter voice, almost more chilling in its calmness. Just let Mom run her game. We're not counting on the money now anyway. If Ava plays nice, she can still help us later. I sat frozen. Not because I was shocked, but because I was devastated by how unsurprised I felt. This wasn't disappointment anymore. This was confirmation. Of every instinct, every sleepless night, every quiet calculation that had led me to rewrite my will. And now here was Ava, recording it all, risking the only home she knew to capture the truth. Not for attention, not for credit, but for protection, for me. In another file labeled Kitchen Night, Megan's voice dropped into a whisper. If we push just a little harder, she'll crack. We'll say she's confused, maybe get the lawyer to question her state of mind, and then boom, the trust gets flagged. The file ended with the sound of Ava's quiet, shaken breath. I pressed pause. What do you do when your granddaughter becomes your shield? When the youngest person in the family is the only one brave enough to listen, record safe? I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and pride. This child, this quiet, watchful girl, had been carrying a truth that no adult had been willing to say out loud. At the very bottom of the folders was a document, just a few lines of text. But it broke me more than the recordings. Grandma, I didn't know who else to tell. I hear things when they think I'm asleep. I know they're lying. I believe you. I'm saving this in case you ever need help. That was it. And I wept, not just for me, but for her. For the quiet courage it took to hit record. For the moments she must have sat alone in the dark, wondering if anyone would believe her. I backed up the flash drive twice. One copy for Alan, one locked in my safe. Then I sat down and wrote Ava a new letter. Not the one she'd get at 18. This one was for if anything ever happened to me before then. If they ever tried to twist her words, gaslight her, make her feel like she imagined it all. I wanted her to have proof, not just of what she saw, but of what she did. That she didn't look away. Because in this family, she was the first one who didn't. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just held that tiny black flash drive in my palm like it was a grenade and a gift all at once. I thought of Gerald, of what he would have said if he could see her. I imagined his proud, tired smile. And I made a vow not just to protect her inheritance, but to protect her voice. Because Ava wasn't just my heir, she was my witness. And in a house full of silence, she had chosen to speak. The mediation took place in a downtown office that tried too hard to feel neutral. Beige walls, soft chairs, a glass table with bottles of water lined up like peace offerings. But I knew better. That room wasn't neutral. It was a battlefield dressed in politeness, and I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to draw the final line. Nathan and Megan walked in 5 minutes late. Megan was dressed like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama, heels too loud, blazer too tight, makeup too precise. Nathan looked older, thinner, like guilt had started chewing on him from the inside out. He avoided my eyes. Megan didn't. I said nothing. Alan sat beside me, calm and steady. In front of us was a folder. Inside the bank transfers Gerald's unsent letter, the audio file of Nathan's deflections, and Ava's flash drive, labeled simply evidence. I didn't need to yell. I brought the truth in paper and digital form. And that was louder than anything Megan could ever say. The mediator, a woman named Joyce, with a careful voice and legal eyes, began with a simple question. Can you briefly explain why we're here today? Megan didn't hesitate. She launched into a monologue dressed as concern. She called me grief-stricken, confused, possibly unstable, said I'd made major estate decisions in the shadow of loss, claimed I was alienating family, weaponizing inheritance, showing signs of paranoia. She played the victim flawlessly. Tears just beneath the surface, that well-rehearsed tremble in her voice. But it was a performance. And I had the script she'd written behind closed doors. When Joyce turned to me, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply slid the folder across the table and said, "This is why." She opened it, page by page, date by date, transfer by transfer, the letter from Gerald, the transcript from Nathan's visit, the audio recordings, Ava's voice on tape, Megan's threats in her own words. And I watched Joyce's face shift. Not in horror, but in certainty. She turned to Megan and asked the question that shattered the mask. Were you aware your daughter recorded multiple conversations in which you discussed altering a legal trust through deception? Megan's face drained of color. She's 12, she snapped. She doesn't understand context. But it was too late. The room had turned. Nathan didn't speak. He just rubbed his hands together like he could erase fingerprints from his guilt. I looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet devastation. "She tried to warn you," I said, and that's when Megan exploded. Not with innocence, not with logic, with rage. She slammed her palm on the table, yelling, "This is all because you couldn't handle your husband dying. You're punishing us because you're lonely." Joyce raised a hand and asked her to step outside. Megan stormed out, heels echoing like a warning shot. Nathan stayed. And for the first time since Gerald's funeral, he looked at me, really looked. His voice was low, almost childlike. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad," he whispered. "No," I said. "You didn't want to know." He nodded, staring at the table. "I just wanted peace." "You don't get peace from silence," I told him. "You get it from standing up when it matters." When Joyce returned, her face was firm. "There is no basis to challenge the trust," she said. "It is legally sound, well documented, and morally justified." Ava's recordings indicate a clear pattern of manipulation and coercion. The trust stands. Megan never came back in, not even to hear the verdict. Nathan left quietly. No handshake. No goodbye. Just a bowed head and the weight of what he had lost. Not the money, but the right to rewrite what had happened. I sat for a moment, gathering my things, listening to the silence in that beige room. And for the first time since Gerald's heart stopped beating, I felt something settle in me. Not relief, not triumph, just a final kind of sorrow. Because this wasn't a win, it was a reckoning. The moment when the truth becomes so undeniable, no one can pretend anymore. And in that stillness, I knew I had not just protected Ava's future. I had preserved Gerald's honor. And I had finally buried the illusion that love on its own could save someone who never wanted to be saved. Ava turned 18 last Friday. There was no party, no balloons, no streamers, or cakes with flickering candles. Just a quiet knock on my front door a little after noon. When I opened it, she stood there taller now, steadier, but still with that same softness in her eyes. The one Gerald used to say reminded him of me when we first met. In her hands was a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. The letter I had written 5 years earlier. She held it out and said, "I wanted to read it with you." I didn't speak. I just stepped aside and let her in. We sat together in Gerald's old chair, side by side, our knees touching lightly, the silence between us, thick with unspoken knowing. She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like it might disintegrate in her fingers. 6 pages. My handwriting. Every sentence written during one of the hardest seasons of my life. She read silently, lips moving, eyes darting across the paper, pausing only once to ask, "Is all of this still true?" And I answered without hesitation. Every word. When she finished, she folded the letter in her lap and turned to me with tears in her eyes. Not the kind born from sorrow, but from understanding. And she said, "Thank you for telling me the truth when no one else would." She hugged me then, tighter than she ever had before. I could feel her heart beating against mine, not as a child needing comfort, but as a young woman choosing clarity, choosing truth. And in that moment, I realized this was the real legacy Gerald and I had left behind. Not money, not property, but a girl who had learned to stand in her own light, no matter how dark the room. Afterward, she pulled out her phone and showed me a video just a few seconds long. A courtroom, a judge, Ava standing tall. I'd like to change my middle name to Coraline after my grandmother. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't stop the tears then. Couldn't hold back the wave that rose in my chest. She hadn't just inherited my name. She'd chosen it. That afternoon, we went to her high school graduation. The sun was warm, the sky clear. One of those rare days where everything feels temporarily right. When her name was called Ava Coraline Whitfield, She looked straight at me in the crowd and smiled. Not just with her mouth, but with her whole face, her whole soul. And in that smile, I saw it, all the pain we'd walked through, the strength we'd reclaimed, the future we were rewriting. Nathan was there too, sitting alone in the back row, eyes red suit wrinkled, clapping not with pride, but with obligation. He didn't approach me, didn't approach Ava, not because he wasn't allowed, but because he finally understood what it meant to be cut off in ways that went deeper than a bank account. He had forfeited more than inheritance. He had forfeited presence, and Ava had noticed. After the ceremony, she ran to me first, wrapped her arms around me. My roommate backed out for next semester, she whispered, "So I chose you," and I laughed through my tears. I'd get another year of her stories drifting down the hallway, of her toothbrush beside mine, of music softly playing behind her bedroom door. Not because I asked for it, but because she offered it. We never mentioned Megan that day, not once. By then, she had faded into the background like a subplot that no longer mattered. Her silence was more telling than any apology she never gave. And that was fine. Some chapters are meant to stay closed. That night, as I tucked Ava into her old childhood bed, just for habit's sake, she smiled up at me and said, "You gave me a life I didn't even know I needed." I kissed her forehead and replied, "No, sweetheart. You chose it. I just cleared the path." And as I walked back down the hallway to my own room, past the photo of Gerald on the wall, I touched the frame gently and whispered, "She's going to be okay, love. We're going to be okay." For the first time in years, I actually believed it. Some stories don't end with a bang. They end in silence. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels earned. 3 months after Ava's graduation, I found myself alone in the house again. The rooms were still. The air was soft. The chair where Gerald died no longer haunted me. It grounded me. It reminded me not of loss, but of love, and the line I had drawn when no one else would. I thought about everything that had unfolded. Nathan's absence, Megan's manipulation, the transfers, the flash drive, the mediation, and the letter. I thought about how much I'd given up to protect what mattered. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken by it. I felt whole in a way I couldn't explain. Not because I had fixed everything, but because I had stopped pretending everything was fine. That I've learned is where real healing begins. It doesn't come with forgiveness forced before its time. It doesn't arrive neatly wrapped in apologies we'll never get. It comes when we make peace with the truth, no matter how bitter, how brutal, how lonely. The truth becomes our companion. It walks beside us like an old friend who's done pretending. And eventually we stop reaching for the people who refused to reach back. We stop watering relationships that only bloomed in convenience. I used to think legacy meant leaving behind money or property or a name written in cursive at the bottom of a will. But I've come to understand that legacy is far more intimate. It's the values we pass on when no one is watching. It's the way we teach someone how to draw boundaries, how to speak up, how to stand their ground even when their voice shakes. Ava became that legacy, not because she inherited my trust, but because she earned it. She saw through the illusion. She listened when no one thought she was listening. She recorded what they wanted to erase. And she told the truth not to punish, but to protect. In a family where silence had once been the unspoken currency, she chose to break it. And in doing so, she saved us both. There was a moment just days after she moved into her dorm when I received one final message from Nathan. A single line. No apology. No explanation. I don't know how we come back from this. And I stared at those words for a long time before quietly deleting them. Because the answer wasn't mine to give anymore. It belonged to Ava. It belonged to the future. To the version of this family that chose truth over comfort, accountability over convenience. He had made his choice, and now I had made mine. We cannot carry everyone across the river. Some choose to stay on the shore, and when they do, we don't drown ourselves trying to drag them back. We build a bridge forward for those who are willing to walk. A few weeks later, I finally replaced the curtains in Gerald's room, the ones we never got around to changing. And as the morning light streamed in through soft linen, I felt something lift. Not the grief it will always live with me stitched into the seams of my everyday, but the guilt. The weight of wondering whether I had done enough. Because now I knew I had done what Gerald couldn't finish. I had protected the truth. I had given voice to the quiet. And I had placed our legacy not in the hands of the entitled, but in the heart of the worthy. When I walk past Gerald's photo, now I still talk to him, not out of sorrow, but ritual. A sacred rhythm that keeps him near. I tell him how Ava's doing, how she's growing into her name, how she's planning to study law, to protect the quiet ones like Grandma, she told me once with that familiar fire in her voice. And I know he hears me. Because when the house falls silent again each night, it doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies, they come from the people we once trusted to stand beside us in our darkest hour. This story is a painful but powerful reminder that loyalty is not guaranteed by blood. It is earned through presence, respect, and truth. Cora's journey teaches us that grief does not excuse manipulation, and silence is not always strength, it can be complicity. Her courage to draw legal and emotional boundaries wasn't about revenge, it was about integrity. She understood that protecting what matters, legacy, dignity, truth, sometimes means standing alone, even against those you once raised. The most powerful act she committed wasn't disinheritance. It was choosing clarity over comfort, and teaching her granddaughter Ava that real love doesn't hide behind polite lies. It speaks even when it's painful. It acts even when it's lonely. In a world that often asks us to keep the peace at the expense of our values, this story dares us to do the opposite, to stand firm, protect the vulnerable, and make silence impossible when truth is under threat. So, if you've ever been made to feel like setting boundaries makes you harsh or speaking up makes you dramatic, remember this. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's wise. And one day, someone watching, maybe a child, a grandchild, or even your future self, will be grateful that you chose truth over comfort.